Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Ryan Bijan, host of Cowtown Movie Classics, and tonight we are capping off our Humphrey Bogart double feature with one of the films often considered by critics, historians, and major institutions as certainly one of the top 2 or 3 greatest movies ever made. From 1942, it is Casablanca, directed by Michael Curtiz, featuring an incredible ensemble cast. Of course, in addition to the great Humphrey Bogart, we have Ingrid Bergman, Paul Henreid, Claude Rains, Peter Lorre, Conrad Veidt, Sidney Greenstreet. I don't think casts get much better than that. Joining me tonight is a very special guest. He is the former Executive Vice President of Archiving and the Library at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. It is a pleasure to be sitting here with Mr. Randy Haberkamp. How are you doing tonight, Randy?
Fine, thanks, Ryan. Happy to be here.
Oh, of course. Now, Casablanca, it's one of those films, it's part of our culture, it's part of our lexicon, like The Wizard of Oz or Star Wars. What more can be said about this film that hasn't already been said?
I think the most important thing that can be said is putting it all in context, because, when you say it's a great movie and you watch it and you say, wow, that was a great movie, that's part of it. But I think the real interesting part is what a miracle it was that it came to be, and how it was really a product of its time and a convergence of things that happened in just such a way that it still makes it feel modern and it still makes it feel relevant, which so many older films, don't have that or aren't able to attain that. And considering that the script wasn't even finished when they began production, that's not the way to start a good production. But in the studio system of the 1940s at Warner Brothers, they just happened to have all the right people converge and all of the right ideas converged to make this thing work. And I don't think anybody thought that that was what was going to happen. I think everybody thought they were kind of maybe on a train that they just had to hold on for dear life,
Certainly. And you mentioned, of course, the studio system. It really was a factory. They called it the Dream Factory. They're pumping out probably 100 movies a week. That's not much of an exaggeration. Now, a movie like Casablanca, I mentioned the high caliber of talent involved in the film, obviously in front of the camera, behind the camera. But at that time, how did Warner Brothers see the project? I mean, it certainly wasn't a B movie, but was it considered kind of a prestige picture at that time?
They had Hal Wallace producing, and he believed in the play that had never been produced, but he believed in the story, and he thought it was a very strong story. The important thing to remember, I think, is that Warner Brothers was really the only studio that was really touching any kind of anti-Nazi or anti-German material, and this was pretty blatant. They had already done Confessions of a Nazi Spy, which was the first studio to even have the word Nazi as a part of the film. And at the same time, people forget that before Pearl Harbor, Americans were very divided about whether we should get involved with the war in Europe or not. And they really considered it somebody else's problem. And of course, when Pearl Harbor happened, then it was like, oh, I guess we were wrong. I guess we need to really deal with this. And they literally actually bought the rights to this play just right after Pearl Harbor, day after Pearl Harbor. So they developed it very quickly, which they were able to do because they had a stable of writers, and they gave it some of their best writers, and they didn't just give it to one, they gave it to several. And so there's authorship claims about the project. And they also knew that they pretty much wanted to use Bogart because he was kind of the rising star from Maltese Falcon. But the real interesting part of this is that they had this influx of talent that had come from Europe. Peter Lorre, Conrad Veidt, and Paul Henreid, those were people that were all imports, and not to mention Ingrid Bergman coming from Sweden, which is a little bit different, but still, you had this European kind of international film being made all of a sudden, in a studio and in Hollywood, where things had been very much, studio-based, Hollywood-based, and very American in their approach. So I think, again, the timelessness of this is the fact that you had so many actors and so many people participating, from the director all the way through some of the technical departments, who had a very strong feeling about, this particular war and this particular effort. And it doesn't feel saccharine or forced. It feels like when they're singing, the Marseillaise, that is a very heartfelt moment, and it still works today. You can feel that passion that was on the set, and you can see it in the faces of the actors in a way that you might not have if you were basically paying people just to do it, as opposed to people who were living it.
Of course, we are paying tribute to the great Humphrey Bogart today. And you mentioned he was hot off the success of The Maltese Falcon. And, this is one of those films that's gone down in movie history. There's been so many myths and rumors. They say, okay, Humphrey Bogart wasn't the first choice. They offered it to George Raft. Who are some of the other actors considered at that time?
Well, they put out a press release saying that Ronald Reagan was being considered, but the truth of the matter is he really wasn't being considered. He was in a film that they were trying to promote him, King's Row, and so he had already left for the service and was involved with that by the time they got around to this. So it wouldn't have worked out. I think they were really pushing for Bogart, and the studio just used stuff like that in whatever way they needed to get people and get press about things. By the time Casablanca was finished, they had a really set cast, but there were, even with the leading actress role, originally there was some other talk, but I think Ingrid Bergman was who they wanted, but they had to borrow her from Selznick and make that arrangement. So, and I think they got lucky. Even with Paul Dooley, they had a couple of people they were considering, and the fact that they got him, and the fact that that part was written as such a friend of Rick's and such an integral part of, his friendship was actually part of the plot. I think, and the song and all of that. I mean, I think that really is part of what makes this film look less dated, because it doesn't have stereotypes in the same way that a lot of other films of that period did. And it's a really, human role and performance and three-dimensional character, as opposed to the stereotypical, oh, here comes the black maid or butler or whatever. So it's another one of those things that makes Casablanca so enjoyable today, in that it doesn't have some of the political flaws that some other films would have from that period.
That's an excellent point. And then also, I don't want to say that the movie has been ripped off, even though it has, but when you watch this movie even today, you see the DNA of everything from James Bond to Raiders of the Lost Ark to basically any romantic melodrama made in the 80 years since. I mean, it's just been so influential, but then you go back and watch it, I mean, it's all there. It's all perfectly fine-tuned, and it just works.
There were people at the time who compared this to Grand Hotel, like Rick's was Grand Hotel, and I'm, I don't know where that's a stretch. But again, it's all about what's in your mind and what's in your experience as far as ripoffs are concerned. And yes, everything that has ever been, every story has borrowed from what's come before. And some work as original works and feel genuine, and others feel like blatant copies and kind of plastic. And again, Casablanca could very easily have felt like that, because God knows there have been plenty of films, who dealt with people trapped, or spies and broken love affairs, all those, and even songs, like as time goes by, but which had been used before, or created before. So all of those things are things that are easy to say, but again, I think when you watch the film, does it affect you, and does it feel real to you? Does it feel successful to you? And I think Casablanca, even after all the copying and all the familiarity, that often happens with Citizen Kane. When people see it, they think, oh, I don't get what the big deal is. Well, that's because you don't know how groundbreaking this was, And what's really groundbreaking about Casablanca is it managed to deal with something as touchy as political, battles, as well as patriotism, in a way that still feels like it speaks to individual people who, and also how to deal with, perhaps a doomed love affair, that kind of relationships, a triangle, so to speak. Everybody has those kinds of issues, and this one manages to resolve itself in a way that feels very true to people who have principles. And it's so hard to be principled in the movies,
Yeah.
The whole idea of hero and villain can get very touchy and be very subjective. And in this case, I think it manages to hold on. And of course, it was this moment in time, right after Pearl Harbor, when things were much clearer to the American public as far as what was going on. And it did call up some of the debates that they'd had, just like Rick was having with himself, as to what was better for him to do. Should he put himself out there? Because it was totally against his character at that point. And yet, at the same time, not very long after this, within the next decade, what had been already started with House Un-American Activities Committee came back again, and some of the people involved with Casablanca were being questioned on their patriotism and on their political affiliations. So, again, it was just this right period in time. And of course, everybody thinks of World War II as the Great War, and the war that America was on the right side. But that ebbs and flows with change, and as time goes by, so to speak.
Certainly. Now, if there's anyone in the audience who has somehow never seen Casablanca and they're going to get to experience it tonight for the first time on the big screen, what do they have to look forward to?
Well, the thing that I think is the other signpost for this movie is that, in my opinion, there's certainly others, but this is one of, if not the great studio Hollywood film, because you're not in Casablanca, you're not even outside of Los Angeles. The entire thing was shot on a backlot and using all the techniques of the studio system. The crowd scenes, the costumes, the sets, everything was built and done in a very short amount of time in 1942. Very, very quickly put together. They were, like I said, scrambling to get the script done. There was some improvisation or some additional lines even added that have become classic lines. But the thing about this film is the art direction, the camera work, the lighting, the costuming, all of it puts you right in that world. You don't even think about the fact that you're seeing this completely artificial thing. It's very convincing, and it's cut and edited in a way that it moves quickly. The music is one of the best scores ever written, so you're brought along on this emotional journey with the music. Again, there's so many reasons why this movie could have gone wrong or could have had flaws, but it is just truly the best of what Hollywood did in 1942.
Certainly. Mr. Randy Haberkamp, thank you so much for your time. If you're in the audience, please stick around after the movie so you can hear the rest of our conversation. Without further ado, from 1942, the one, the only, Casablanca. When I'm ranking my top 5 or top 10 personal favorite movies ever made, I don't necessarily put Casablanca on there, but the fact is, it's a movie. If it's on TV, if I'm flipping through like Turner Classic Movies, or if I see it on HBO Max, I will sit down and watch the rest of the film. I'm invested.
There's different tests. I think one of the tests for favorite movies is, did it impact you when you saw it? And what was the impact? The other is, did it do something that you felt you'd never seen before? Or did it have a style or a director or something that just really knocked you out artistically? And then I think there's the repeatability factor. Like you say, it comes on the screen, Oh, gotta watch it. Oh, I've seen it too many times. No, I haven't. I'm loving this too much. That's a whole different kind of thing. And Casablanca is definitely, I think, the king of the repeatability factor. There are very few films that have that kind of mesmerizing quality. Mesmerizing quality when you're watching and you just go, "Wow, this is even better than I remember." Or what a it's like a warm, cup of hot chocolate or something where you're just like, wow. And it's not that it's some movies are entertaining and really make, like Singing in the Rain just is something that just feels joyous and makes you feel happy. But Casablanca has a double edge to it. There is that love story where you're like, oh gosh, if only they could go off together. They're so good together, and at the same time, you realize no, they have to do what's right. And they have to fight the fight, and it's just a remarkable achievement and a delicate balance. And I think one of the things that is also evident to me is that this peak that was reached was very soon to tip, because you had this right in the middle of the war when everything came together, and then you have Hal Wallace go to the Oscars and have Jack Warner step up and accept the Oscar for Best Picture instead of him, who was the producer. And so it was one of those things where he was like, oh my gosh, I have just been dissed and cut out of this. And he was really offended by that, and ended up being leaving the studio shortly after that. And he was their producer. He was their, and if you look at the credits of the films that he was involved in the 30s before all this, he was quality producer. And Jack Warner was a studio boss, and yes, he had a lot of opinions, and yes, he had a lot of influence, but it was also Harry Warner who was very involved in the political part of this. Harry is the one who testified before the House Un-American Activities, about Confessions of a Nazi Spy, right before all this came down. And so Harry was the one who kind of put Warner Brothers in the lead as far as being the studio that had the nerve to take on, Nazi oppression. The Warner Brothers were Jewish, of course, and they were the first to kind of say, hey, we're not going to worry about our film distribution in Germany. We'd rather say no than to have to deal with what's going on there, and to support it. And the other studios were like, oh, we need that money, and it's which is like, what, self-preservation here? What are you talking about? So there was a lot of politics going into this, and a lot of politics coming out of it. So I think that watching this film and having it being aware of its importance politically, being aware of its signposts that it created for Warner Brothers, is really fascinating. And it comes across as being more of a romance and an entertainment, but there's really, really important issues underlying this film. And I think it had a great deal to do with a lot of people in the war feeling positive about fighting the good fight, and that, we have to win this, and public opinion and public perception during a war is very important, as America finds out on a regular basis when it gets involved in conflicts.
Certainly. So the film certainly had a tremendous real-world impact. But I'm curious, too, when we think of a lot of the great movies of yesteryear that we take for granted, oh, this movie's a classic, it's always been well-loved, you look back and you think, oh, wow, it took a while to find its audience. So even though Casablanca was an Academy Award-winning film, what was the audience reception like in 1942, 1943?
It was a matter of timing. The only one I can think of similar in some ways was China Syndrome, which came out right as Chernobyl happened, and or 3 Mile Island, and so there was this instant interest in nuclear, accidents and all that kind of stuff, that whole drama. this came right out after Pearl Harbor, when everybody was like suddenly, wait a minute, what's going on? Oh my gosh, we've been attacked, and there was complete panic and pandemonium, and the war. The United States really that was somewhat prepared, but not really. There had just been so much hesitation to get involved. So I think this film really caught the zeitgeist, and it made a lot of money on its first release and was very popular. It was also very popular internationally in places where they could still get American movies, which, trust me, this is one they didn't want shown as soon as the Germans took over, Mm-hmm. But it was a very popular film then, and I think that after the war was over, it kind of felt like a war movie a little bit more, and so people were like thinking, okay, that's really great. But I think with the advent of television and with the advent of home video and stuff like that, it's just become one of those films that people love returning to. And there was a particular appeal with Bogart in the 60s with all the anti-war demonstrations and the student demonstrations. So Bogart was kind of an anti-hero that people latched onto as something that was still contemporary to them, as opposed to some other heroes who felt a little bit, old-fashioned. And so I think that was also, again, the film has a way of feeling modern, even when it's very strongly 1942,
Mm-hmm. Well, as I mentioned, you've had a long relationship with the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences. So what are some, I'm sure you've come across some amazing artifacts from the film. Some of them are even on display today. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, there was just recently at the Academy Museum, one of the curators, Dara Jaffe, put that together, and they had a Casablanca, area where they were dealing with Casablanca, and it was everything changes in the museum constantly. So you have things that represent a classic film, and you have things that represent a directing and different branches, and so there's themes and reasons behind what's in there. But for a while there was this Casablanca exhibit, and when you walked in, they were able to bring together for the first time the two pianos. You don't always think about there being two pianos. There was a piano in Paris in the flashback sequence, and there was a piano in Rick's Cafe. They had both of those original pianos that were used. They're smaller pianos, and they're very ornately decorated, but they were in the room. But the part that really was one of those things that, zeroed in on what I was talking about earlier was they were able to get the Laszlo's passport, with his picture and everything, which was, of course, Paul Henry character. And you had also his original passport coming from Germany, where he was immigrating. And so, again, it was two very small pieces of paper that just really zeroed in on the fact of what made that movie so unique, because you had the reality and the fiction merging in such a unique way with those documents. And of course, they had several other stories that they told about the people in the film, Peter Lorre and Conrad Veidt and Ingrid Bergman's diary. And it was just one of those things where you suddenly realized, oh, this was personal, this was very personal. And so the way those people became involved, and the fact that they were all in Hollywood when just a few years earlier they would have been in Germany or Sweden or someplace else, it was really a fascinating way that a museum exhibit can say something that again, the picture's worth 1,000 words to see those displayed.
Definitely. Did they have the letters of transit? Were those on display?
I don't remember that being on display. I mean, part of it is what survives and who has it and where it is. And the Warner Brothers studio has a tour that they give, and occasionally they always have something. They've had, I think, some of Ingrid Bergman's costumes and things like that, and Rick's trench coat. Sometimes it's Casablanca, and sometimes it's Maltese Falcon. He was always wearing a trench coat, but it just depends. You have to. The difficulty with all of this is, number one, you have to know where it is. Nobody was thinking about a museum in 2025 when the film was over. They were just thinking, we got to get rid of all this stuff. It's amazing how much from Casablanca did survive. There's chairs and the pianos and all kinds of things. And that's because I think they had the studio where they reused things and they stored things. But I think also because it was such a distinctive film in the way it looked and the things that it was, creating, that it made it worth keeping, and people recognized it.
Absolutely. And I was wondering that, do a lot of these pieces, were they just sitting in a Warner Brothers warehouse somewhere, or did they come from private collections on loan?
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere. There's just hundreds of things, and they all get scattered. A lot of it gets torn down and thrown out, and even such a thing as with Casablanca, a lot of different versions of the script survive, and part of that is because it was Casablanca and people realized it was kind of special, and part of it was the luck of what got saved in the archives and where it ended up. There's lots of films and lots of archives that just get totally lost, and you can never really piece together what happened in the same way that you're able to with this film. So it's just lucky in many ways. When people are always surprised what becomes valuable, and there are other things that people say for years and nobody cares. But it's a very fortunate and lucky thing that things survive the way they do.
Oh, thankfully. Now I'm curious, so you mentioned that there's alternate scripts, and again, this film has been so heavily mythologized in our culture. Were there alternate endings? I mean, I've heard different stories and ideas, or was it always meant to end the way it did?
I've heard that there were alternate endings too. I don't really have any. I haven't researched it enough to know what the I think they were on such a tight schedule that they pretty much, and they were writing that ending right up to the end, and there was definitely a line or two added by Bogart, but a lot of that stuff was definitely there. I don't really. I don't want to spread any false rumors, and at the same time, I don't want anybody to think that this was all set in stone and just completely written in draft one. I mean, it was literally constant. There were Hal Wallace claimed to add several lines, and various other people. A lot of the information, a lot of the plot, and a lot of some of the lines even came from the play, the original, material that they bought. And there was a lot of argument about that, and of course, I think more things have come to light over the years. But there have been entire books written about this movie, and they have different versions of what they think happened, and so unless you go back and look yourself at each of these documents, it's hard to really say how you would interpret it. Some things aren't dated or are a little unclear, but it's also something that if you look at the work of the people that are involved, you get a sense for what they were known for doing and what their methods were, and so you get a sense of, well, yeah, that probably was them, and this probably was somebody else. So there were some people that were known to have worked in the film, and others that weren't even credited. But again, I think it was that convergence of everybody coming together a very strong, very opinionated producer who knew what he wanted, and a director who was really known for just going in and getting it. I mean, Curtiz is not a director who is often thought of as one of the greats. He's kind of thought as a studio director, and people don't know a lot about him in the same way you know about Hitchcock or even Wyler and John Ford. And Wyler even is somebody who I don't think is as appreciated as he should be, because he didn't have a stamp like John Ford or Alfred Hitchcock. He could do anything, and he did it really well. But if you're really looking at the directors who directed some of your favorite films, Curtiz is one of them, and he's definitely somebody that is probably a little more mysterious because he didn't speak English very well, and he was also kind of a blustery guy that just kind of forced things through. But you can't deny that the films are really finely crafted and really, have a great pacing. And, they knew what they were doing when they assigned him to this movie.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you bring up Curtiz because, as you mentioned, when we think of Alfred Hitchcock, he's the master of suspense. John Ford is the king of the Western. But then again, you end up with someone like Michael Curtiz who could do any genre, any topic, and the only thing they have in common is they end up becoming these amazing classic films. I mean, we're talking about Casablanca, The Adventures of Robin Hood, Angels with Dirty Faces, White Christmas. I mean, the list just goes on and on.
Yeah, White Christmas is the one that kind of you think, what, who, and but at the same time, it really it's got a style and a move, and it moves, and it's just again, he knew how to take the elements and make the best of them, which is sometimes you can have everything and it falls apart because the best elements don't quite gel. And he knew how to glue it all together.
Right. So before we close out, I think it's worth mentioning, of course, Hollywood nowadays, they're very sequel happy, very franchise happy. If you have a big hit, obviously you want to cash in on that, right? And squeeze the story dry until you ruin the story. So in a case like Hollywood wasn't all that different in the 1940s. You would have very successful long-running franchises and serials. Was there ever talk at that time about doing a direct follow-up to Casablanca?
Not that I'm aware of, and I think it's one of those films where you just look at how would you do it. They tried to make a TV series based on Casablanca, which was just really not good, and God knows they've tried to imitate it countless ways, and it's also got some of the most quotable lines, and those lines have been used in all kinds of projects, and of course, one of them was called "Play It Again, Sam," and that's not even the line. It's "Play it, Sam, play as time goes by," but everybody says "Play it again, Sam." They think that that's the line. It's just got a mythology all its own, and I think because of the way that film ended with such a definitive split, it would be hard to go back on it and not look like you were undercutting what made the film special.
Exactly. Well, you mentioned the famous line. Well, in the film, it's "Play it, Sam." Before we close out, I feel like we certainly have to mention the incredible work of the composer Max Steiner. This is one of the all-time great musical scores. Is it true? I've heard that Max Steiner did not want to use "As Time Goes By," and it was only supposed to be a placeholder. Is there any validity to that?
Yeah, he wasn't a fan of it. And of course, part of that is ego. He'd rather compose something himself. And part of it was, his particular thought about the song, but Hal Wallace basically said, no, this is it. And so, Max was not stupid. When the producer said, you're going to do it, he did it. And in fact, he uses the theme constantly throughout his score, where by the time it's over, you're humming the song, you just can't help yourself. And I think that he realized certainly afterwards that it worked, and he knew how to make the best of a bad situation for himself. But it is a fantastic score, and there's something about the Warner Brothers films, and Max Steiner, scored most of the best of them. He just has a style, and he works so quickly, and was so able to just keep the pressure on and keep going, that it's almost impossible to come anywhere near him. But he knows when to use music, he knows when to push it, he knows when to not use it. I mean, he's got an amazing sensibility for movie scoring, and he's one of the few composers that you can take the soundtracks and have the whole thing play in your head, and feel the film even without the images. So I can't say enough about him.
Well, he's certainly one of the all-time greats. I think it is worth mentioning, it just kind of popped in my head. So the opening title music for Casablanca, if you've ever seen a movie, is it The Lost Patrol? Is it the John Ford film from 1935? Is that the name?
Could be.
Yeah.
Could be.
I think is it The Lost Patrol? I think that's the film I'm thinking of. It's an RKO movie, but it has the same, Max Steiner did the score. It basically has the same opening title music from Casablanca. So.
Yeah, you when you're writing as quickly as he did and working as many projects as he did, you never let a good idea use just once. You found a way. And of course, he knew, again, how to make it fit into what he was working on. One of the things that I think is interesting about Max Steiner, because I recently was putting a clip show together of Warner Brothers trailers, and a friend of mine who wrote the book on Max Steiner, Steve, said that he was contractually obligated to compose an original score for the trailers. So when you watch them, you can see that even though it's using themes, it's all timed so that it fits into the trailer, and it makes the trailer really impactful, because you have this completely scored piece that makes it feel, instead of like just a bunch of scenes cut together, it makes it feel like a build to the end when it says Betty Davis or and you're just like, oh my gosh, So it's amazing that they took that time and took that care to make the trailers as impactful as possible, because that's what they were using to sell these films. Because in those days, seeing the trailer in the movie made you come back next week,
Absolutely. You're making me want to go back on YouTube and pay closer attention to some of these trailers to keep an ear out for that.
A lot of times you see other studios and you can hear the cuts, or you can feel the jar when it goes from one thing to another, but there's this continuum on his trailers that I just was like, wow, they had to have scored this, because it's just too smooth, Mm-hmm. And sure enough, Steve backed it up for me. So.
Right. Well, I'll definitely have to listen for that. So do you have any closing thoughts on Casablanca?
How lucky we are that film had such a fast and fateful construction. Ingrid Bergman was, never better in that film, and she made a lot of great films afterwards, and at the same time realized that this was the one that people remembered her for. And I think it's because the chemistry of her and Bogart, even though they really, didn't have much of a friendship or anything on the set, they were just very good actors who knew how to, create that chemistry. I think, Bogart, he's remembered for many films, but this is the one I think that gave him a sense of dimension that some of the other films felt a little a little more charactery, and this film feels like, you feel the humanity of him in a way you never had before.
Right, he's not just the tough guy in this.
Not just the tough guy. And, oh my God, Sidney Greenstreet, Peter Lorre, Conrad Veidt, Paul Henreid. Henry. I always mispronounce his name.
Even I'm not sure. Sometimes I do Henried, sometimes I say Henried, so I can't make
Yeah,
up
yeah. I'm forgetting somebody. Who's the guy that plays the French Vichy?
Claude Rains.
Claude Rains.
Of
Yes.
course. How can you
Claude.
forget Claude Rains?
Exactly. Just
Yeah.
what a cast, and each one of them is just perfect, and each one of them gets their special moment, and just amazing. And like I said, just watching that and thinking this was all made on the Warner Brothers lot in 1942, you're just like, man, they knew what they were doing, and they did it every day quickly, and they were organized, and it's so amazing to me, and for such a budgetary, they were very budget conscious on it too. So anyway, but it is, as you mentioned earlier, it is a film that you get sucked into it very easily, and I think it's worth remembering that if things are a little bit, if you need to cleanse your movie palette, it's a good way to bring yourself back to remembering why you love the movies.
Definitely. And I'm glad you brought up the production design earlier. When you're watching this, again, the movie shot entirely on the Warner Brothers backlot, and you're swept away into this North African desert with the exotic intrigue and the supporting cast, even down to like the smaller roles, like Sasha, the bartender. Some of these small parts, these refugees, these characters. It almost feels like a comic book. I mean, everyone is so distinctive and unique. It doesn't feel like it's not reality, but then you don't care because you're just swept into this world that Michael Curtiz and Hal B. Wallace created.
Well, and in reality, that is kind of the way when you go into a bar. That is kind of what happens. Nobody's trying to be real. Everybody's just trying to, have a good time and be amusing. And so the bartender does make comments like that, and he's got his standard answers. And at the same time, there's an intelligence to it where you realize, oh, okay, this guy's paying attention. He knows what's going on. It's really, really terrific.
Certainly. Now, Randy, I know you're a very busy guy. Is there anything you're working on right now you want the audience to know about?
Oh, well, yes, I'm working on a show that is very near and dear to my heart. I do a lot of, now that I've retired, I do a lot of shows at the Old Town Music Hall in El Segundo. I love it because even though it's only 200 seats, 240 seats, it's got the Long Beach Lowe's theater organ, the full-size theater organ with all the pipes and all the bells and whistles, and they use it for every show. They open the curtain so you can see all the things clicking and moving, and it just has such a theater, the type of experience you can only have in a theater. They use it, of course, with a lot of silent films, but they also use it for a sing-along, and it's just got this let's go to the movies love, And so I'm working on a show for Old Town that will be called Hollywood Dogs. It's a clip show, and I'm showing the history and the development of the way dogs were used in movies, mostly in the silent era, because that was when dogs had their name in the title, so to speak, like Ren Tin Tin and some others. But I think it'll be a lot of fun, and I do go into how things developed with sound, because once you had sound, that changed the way dogs had to be able to perform and the way trainers had to work with them. So anyway, it's a lot of fun. I love dogs, and I love the way these movies made us fantasize about our pets in some ways, and in other ways realize what special relationships we have with them.
Oh, absolutely. Now, are you going to mention, are they called the Dogville comedies, right? You know what I'm talking about?
I'm going to mention them, but I'm not going to show one of them. I'm thinking about other parts, and I want to wait on that because I want to make sure that people are prepared for how these things work and how they feel about what the dogs are doing in the films. So it's a little sensitive.
Certainly, yeah, definitely. Watch some of them today. I mean, of course, it's amusing, but it's like I think there probably was no humane society at that time, and
No,
yeah,
no, but they're really amazing at the same time. You know, it does make you wonder what was going on, and you know, it's you know, it's important to remember that our relationship with animals continues to be something that I don't think you know, is as far along as it should be. It's all too sad, the numbers of dogs and cats that still need to find places, still need to find homes, and who are mistreated, and at the same time, there's nothing more rewarding than seeing someone and their dog have a good time, and seeing the dog interacting and appreciating the relationship as much as the human does. So.
certainly. Now, do you have a date for this show set, or you just working on
June
it? Like,
28th at the Old Town Music Hall in El Segundo. And if you haven't been to Old Town Music Hall in El Segundo, you need to go there and check it out, because it's definitely a special place. And they run a lot of classics. There's a lot of variety to it. And it's a great place to bring your family. It's also a great place to have a date. And there's lots of great restaurants around there too. So it's a nice little tucked away part of the Los Angeles area. And it's just far enough away that most people have never been there, and at the same time, when they go, they're like, oh, this isn't that far. You should go here more often. So
well, it's on my list. I haven't made it out there yet, but I definitely need to at some point.
they have a great staff of mostly volunteers. It is an official nonprofit. It was started by two gentlemen who were, just enamored of this theater organ that they were able to get a hold of, and they decided, well, we need to put this someplace where we can use it and have it be performed. And that was in the 60s, and it's still going strong. And those two gentlemen who founded it have both passed, but it's being kept alive now by some people who were influenced from going there as kids. And it's a really terrific. Again, it was a Nickelodeon, or not a Nickelodeon, but it was a small movie theater built in the 20s. And that's what it was built for, and that's what it still is. So, you can feel that history when you walk in there. And they have great popcorn, too, which is, of course, very important.
Of course, certainly. One of the most important parts of the movie-going experience. Mr. Randy Haberkamp, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Good to see you, Ryan.
Good to see you. If you're in the audience, I hope you enjoyed tonight's conversation as much as we had having it. Once again, I'm Ryan Bijan. We'll see you next time.